can say that is not known. Then Professor Asmau Garba Said, also very well-known name, very respected scholar. I had the privilege of working with her when I was in Zaria. She was one of our external examiners, and I'm very pleased to collaborate with her this afternoon. Last but not least is Professor Muhammad Kari from University of Maiduguri, also a very distinguished scholar, very productive, and a good friend of mine. So this panel is composed of very good friends and colleagues that at various points in time have benefited from their scholarship and their wisdom. They will take time to make their presentations. The shorter they can make them, the better, but they will have maximum of 15 to 20 minutes. They will have to surrender the platform to the next colleague so that we will take them all together at one, and then after that we will open the floor. So please make your notes and make sure you remember to attach the notes to the name of the speaker. When we open the floor for comments and questions, you can then direct your point to the specific person. Now, having said all of this, now may I invite Dr. Awal Anwar to the podium to present his paper. I hope all of you are okay with my brief introduction. If I say I will give you full citation, then it will be 6 o'clock before we finish. Thank you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin by thanking the Faculty of History and Development Studies and the organizers for this event. I want to stay on existing protocols. The topic for my presentation is Milestones in the Politics for Influence and Identity, the Ulama in Northern Nigeria since the 1920s. History, like law, puts a lot of premium on precedence, chronology, and sequencing. So I have seen the book of abstracts and the sub-themes for this conference, and there are many things that if people don't know the background to their evolution, they may just be hanging, even when well researched. So I said maybe the best thing for me to do is to discuss a few milestones. That is some landmarks which differentiate stages in the politics for influence and identity among the ulama, especially in their relationship with the state. What are the sources of conflicts or rivalry or cooperation or whatever among the ulama? Broadly speaking, you can say diverse interpretation of texts and principles, religious principles. Sometimes the promotion of peculiar doctrines also lead to a lot of problems, either among or with ulama. So when we are talking of the activities of the ulama or their relationship with the state in northern Nigeria from the 1920s to the present, as from 1920s to 1960s, you are virtually going to discuss the activities of the leaders of the two dominant brotherhoods, the Qadriya and the Tijaniya, because from 1920s up to 1960s, they were the dominant political institutions under whose influence a lot of things happened. So when you are discussing relationships of ulama and the state, you are virtually talking about the activities of the leaders of these brotherhoods. As from 1911 to 1938, many things happened in northern Nigeria, specifically Kano, with the emergence of two schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the Madabo school that has been in existence for centuries, and the Malam Abdurrahman Suyudi, and the emergence of Malam Salga as a head of his own school. So between 1920s to 1960s, most of the debates, between 1920s to around 1940s, 50s, most of the debates in northern Nigeria among the ulama were dominated by the differences in perception between the Madabawa and the Salgawa on death rituals and other things associated with funeral prayer, receiving condolences, and so on and so forth. But as from 1923, things changed. There was one Sheikh Muhammad Alami who came from Morocco in 1923, and when he came, he was a Tijani, and when he came and found the Tijaniya to have been well established in Kano, he advised the leaders that the individual Tijaniya Zawaya should come together and they should build a central Zawiya which will provide them with overall leadership. It was built in Koki, and then Malam Muhammad Salga was appointed to be the Imam of that Zawiya. So the crisis between the Madabawa and the Salgawa on these issues of death rituals had led to the production of many books, many books, which we don't have time to go into details. But there are people like Sani Akuba Adam, who is one of the specialists on the Salga school. He has all the information, and then in the paper I provided some. So in 1923, when Alani gave this suggestion, the Zawiya was built in 1925, and Malam Salga became the Imam of the Zawiya. So because of the differences between the Salga school and the Madabo school, his elevation to be the head of that Zawiya attracted some envy from other scholars, principally from Madabo, because he was their student before. Even though people were saying he was an accomplished scholar, but simply submitted himself. But he was there, and he was there for about 10 to 14 years. So now and then the Madabawa were largely Tijanawa, like 65 to 75% of the ulama there were Tijanawa, but you have about 25 to 30% Qadrawa. Some of them even became Baba Malami. So there was this envy that one of our students has now been placed above our heads with this amalgamated Zawiya. So there were some kind of reports to the colonial authorities that Malam Salga was having some links with the Mahdiya activists or Mahdiya advocates. And in 1929, an incident happened when Malam Muhammadu Sani died, popularly known as Malam Abba. Malam Muhammadu Sani was the father of Sheikh Uwais, the grandfather of current Sheikh Abdullahi Uwais. He died, and when he died, he was a follower of Malam Salga, and it was alleged that he left a will that Malam Salga should perform his funeral prayer. And then he was in Limanchi, an area around Madabo, and Malam Salga went to perform the funeral prayer. That was in 1929. And there was a lot of problems because the Madabawa scholars said, no, nobody can come into Madabo and perform a funeral prayer for somebody who was a resident of Madabo. And the Salgawa said, no, nobody will dictate how our member should be buried or how the funeral prayer for that member should happen. And there were a lot of fracas leading to but Malam Salga ultimately performed the prayer, but 5 of his disciples were arrested and detained. 3 of them, Malam Muhammadu Dangoggo, the great-grandfather of Professor Hafiz Abubakar, was among them, Malam Muhammad Dangoggo, and then Malam Muhammadu Meriga Pata, and then Malam Muhammadu Bronoma. They were arrested and detained for that crisis until when the mother of the emir of Kano talked to him and said, I don't want you to be seen to be taking part in an issue dealing with the two groups of ulama, so please release them, and they were released. So when this happened, Malam Salga, after this one, the resident of Kano on 1st July 1929 invited the ward heads Masu Ungwani and warned them about keeping peace because there was stories of breaches. After that meeting on 1st July, he called Malamai and met with them, during which he dressed down Malam Salga. He humiliated him and said that he was a troublemaker. They had information that he was planning a jihad. He was a Mahdiya, he was this, he was that. And then his house was ransacked. They ransacked his house, but they did not find any weapon. So Malam Salga became disillusioned, and he understood that it was because of envy that he was subjected to this humiliation. So he resigned his appointment as the Imam of that Zawiya. Then Madam Muhammad Mirgapata convinced him to use his own Mirgapata's mosque, which is situated between Maguga and Sanka, before Malam Salga reverted to his house. So Malam Salga resigned, and then he came back to Sanka, his own ward. People are saying Maguga or Maguga. The house of Malam Salga is in Sanka. So the things continued, the crisis continued even after he has left. Then in 1937, two things happened that changed the leadership of Qadiriya and Tijaniya in Kano. And then Kano used to be, or was the headquarters of Tijaniya in particular. Even Qadiriya, though Sokoto is the umbrella, because everything emanated from Sokoto, but the actual activism of Qadirawa was in Kano. So Kano was the headquarters of both Tijaniya and Qadiriya. And then at a point, it also became the headquarters of Nepu, and then and things continued. In 1937, the emir of Kano, Abdullahi Bayero, went on pilgrimage. Before he left, Malam Nasiru Kabara, in that period, we didn't have sheikhs. We have only Malam Salga, Malam Nasiru, because they were so humble. Unlike now, when in every corner mosque you have a sheikh. In every container that has Islam, you have a sheikh inside it. So Malam Nasiru gave Wali Suleiman a letter to take to the head of the Sammaniya Tariqa, Sheikh Abul Hassan as-Sammani. So he took the letter to him. Malam Nasiru was 25 years then, or thereabout. He was seeking for permission to become the head of that Sammaniya in Kano. So Sheikh Sammani was so impressed with the language, the depth, and the analysis, and the issues on which Malam Nasiru spoke, and he gave him unquantified permission. He also advised him to get in touch with other centers of Qadiriya in Iraq and Sudan and other places. So, as they were on pilgrimage, or before the pilgrimage, they were in Mecca, in Medina, then Abdullahi Bayero met Ibrahim Inyas, who was a Senegalese leader of the Qadiriya. And then Abdullahi Bayero said, I haven't started. Okay, let me finish that. Let me. Okay. Then now I will just tell you the milestones. In 1937, we have a change from Salgawa to Ibrahimawa, and then the Qadiriya Nasriya emerged. In 1938, Malam Muhammadu Salga died. From 1937, Sheikh Ibrahim Inyas came to Kano for the first time publicly in 1951, and he played with his hands on his chest, Abalu. And then there was a lot of commotion. because at that time, the only people that were known to be doing Kabalu were Mala Abubakar Gumi and Mal Nasir Kabara. When Ibrahim Inyas came and started Kabalu, they stopped. Malam Gumi defected to Sedalu. Sheikh Nasir defected to Sedalu. And then Tijaniya scholars were doing Sedalu. When Sheikh Gumi and Mal Nasir defected, they defected to Kabalu. So then the issue of Sadula and Kabalu took center stage instead of the issue of Sadukokin Mutua. From 1944 to 1956, there was a lot of repression of the Tijanawa because of Kabalu and the Tijaniya in Sokoto province, particularly in Kauran Namoda and Zurmi and Gusau and other places. And then many Tijaniya scholars like Sheikh Abubakar Atiku and others wrote poems and books on the separation of the Tijanawa. And in 1963, the emir of Kano Sunusi, who inherited the friendship of Inyas from his father, was deposed by the Northern Regional Government of Sardauna, and then the Tijaniya scholars felt there would be war, maybe intellectual or civil. So, and then in 1963, after the deposition of Sunusi, there were frantic efforts to rally around the northern community around the MPC. And as a result, they formed Jamaat Nasr al-Islam. But the Kano scholars, in opposition to Jamaat Nasr al-Islam, formed Fitianu Islam. In 1963, after the deposition of Sunusi, the leadership of Fitianu changed. They made a war cabinet. President became Sheikh Abubakar Atiku. Vice President Sheikh Tijani Usman. Secretary General Vice President Sheikh Mehula. Secretary General Sheikh Tijani Usman. Assistant Secretary Sheikh Mudi Salga. Treasurer Sheikh Sani Kapunga. Auditor Sheikh Farooq Salga. Lazim Officer Dan Iyan Kano Ado Sunusi. That was the cabinet. Because they felt with Sunusi out of the way, repression will come to them. So they did that, but with the death of the Sardauna and the collapse of the MPC, they resigned from this leadership. In 1969, Mala Abubakar Gumi came to Kano and talked to the Emir of Kano, Alhaji Ado Bayero, that he wanted to reconcile with the Kano scholars, that he has understood their differences. Now he wants reconciliation. They met at the Emir's palace, and then Sheikh Abubakar Atiku, Sheikh Tijani Usman, Sheikh Mehula, Sheikh Sani Kafunga, and a few others met with Sheikh Abubakar Gumi. They said he should give them time to think over his proposal. Then they sent a letter to Sheikh Inyas. This is what Gumi has said. What is your opinion? And then he wrote a letter to them saying that this man, he didn't mention Gumi's name, this man, I know him more than you know him. Be on your watch. So they withdrew. A year after, 1970, Malam Gumi said, okay, there is no reconciliation. This continues, struggle continues. Malam Gumi started writing Nasiha series. Nasiha the Muslimi, advice to the Muslim community. Then he tabulated many things, some of which the Rika people are associated with, and said these things resemble unbelief. They resemble unbelief. Like when you want to, let's say, fall down and say, shout, he said, this resembles unbelief. From 1969 to 1970, he continued this Nasiha series. By 1972, Sheikh Abubakar Gumi wrote his book, Al-Aqidatu Sahiha bi Muwafaqati Sharia, that the right belief in Islam is consistent with the Sharia. And in that book in 1972, he came out clearly and said Tijaniya, Qadiriya, Arusiya, Shazaliya, all these non-Islamic organizations. There were a lot of writings between Tijaniya and Qadiriya scholars, to Gumi. Then maybe by 1978, there was Izala organization. So anti-Sufism started from there, 70, 72, 78. There was a Zala organization, and since 1978, the crisis between Gumi and Rika scholars became institutional. It became institutional between Izala and Rika. And then one last thing I will say, even though I have been so mutilated by my friend, Professor Sani, is that at a point in 1963-66, there was this dual personality of the Tijanawa. They were either Tijanawa or Nepu or both. So even in Sokoto, the repression against the Tijanawa was said to be an opposition against Nepu, because they said Nepu disguised and come as Riga something. So I will just, somebody like Akira Aliyu, he told me in one of our interviews in 1987 that whenever he was in prison, he continued with his preaching and conversion in prison. He said people that were there as criminals, he converted them to Nepu. People that were there on civil grounds, he converted them to Tijaniya. So he was both. So after the deposition of Sunusi, even though Sunusi's deposition was fairly political, but the Tijanawa perceived it as a protest against his association with Inyas. And then Akila Aliyu composed a poem which I will just read 4 or 5 stanzas and then I will quit. Everything is in my paper. This poem is known as Isashan Guziri, that is sufficient provision, whereby the Tijaniya people were sending off Sunusi to Azare. Part of it he said, Tijanawa muzo mu haɗu, ba fargaba ma bare mu kaɗu, hadde mu yi shawara ta haɗu, mu bi limamin mu dan mu daɗu, shine mamman maje Azare. Allah mai yi tukun da a yi, shi ke mana maganin maƙiyi, mai yin sallar ganin waɗayi, mai kambu, mai dagar kwaɗayi da yawan haushi kamar na kare. Lalle mu yi ƙoƙari mu tafi jama'a, domin mu san sharafi a cikin wannan farin zarafi, saƙi baya zama mulufi, tilas a gaya wa doguwar kare. Allah mai gyara al'amari, mai tokara kowane kaɗari, ya ɗaukaka naka alƙadari, ya kare ma dubun kaɗari, ka ƙaura zuwa cikin azari. Allah ya baka gam da katar, domin ya taimaka maka har ka nisaci masu aikata tir. Allahu Ubangiji akaba shine da nufin ka je azari. Mu kan mun gaskata muka ce mun yadda da shehu har mu mace, mai kokwanto da Allah a ce ƙarshen lamarinsa zai rikice a dalili ya bujure masu la.
Yes, that comes with the challenge. Yes. Now, our next presenter was Professor Mukhtar Umar Bunza, and his paper is titled Ulama in Nigeria, Definition, Reconceptualization, and Representation of their role and status in historical perspective. The title is already consuming a lot of time. So I can imagine the paper will be much longer. Still, you will have only maximum of 20 minutes. If you finish in 15, we'll be very grateful. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
We try.
Okay, over to you, sir. Wannan ko? To, ina masu kula da wannan, za a sauke wannan. Za ka makala na kare?
Sai na riga na wasu.
Okay, za ka daga note ne? Kuna so a connect ne?
To, na ba su. Ku duba mana. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Mr. Chairman, respected senior colleagues and colleagues Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Title of my presentation is Ulama in Nigeria. Redefinition, reconceptualization, and the representation of their role and the status in historical perspective. From what we have gathered this morning, it is clear that ulama were the mainstay of our society. But over time, they were relegated and marginalized to the background. That the conception of people, definition of individuals, akwai ɗan ƙarin da ni amma no problem. Ci gaba. Wannan nayi. I will speak to the. Okay. What we learned was that ulama were people who virtually sacrificed everything of theirs for the society, for the community. They did and do not, up till now. Scholars we know, they do not have time of their own. Since morning, they engage with this type of student. In the afternoon, they engage with this. In the evening, they engage with this. In the night, they engage with this, and they take care. But in the public sphere, it is pathetic to realize that our Shaykh is not giving the ulama the appropriate positions they deserve. And that has eaten deep in virtually all of us. I have been wary of this, that when I come to lecture, I sometimes used to ask my student that, look, if somebody appears so and so, what is your perception of him? Now you imagine that you see somebody coming up the podium in a jalabiya with a turban, with features that look like an alim, in such a way that we define them. What will you think of him? Then the usual response is that we consider them as people who do not know the world, who could not speak English. The moment you cannot speak English, you are nobody. I give this example that now if somebody who could not read, who could not write, he had not even gone to any institution, any university, any college, but he was dressed in such a corporate dress that we appreciate in the modern day, with a tie and everything, with shoe polished. The moment you see him, you think he's a person up to date. I gave them an example. Like when I was dean of my faculty, I went to the university clinic and I met a newly posted nurse. With my appearance, she invited a cleaner to come and interpret for her what I will tell her. She could not even look at the file to see the official file, my name and my picture, everything on it as a professor and the dean of faculty. What has already mesmerized her thinking was my appearance. So this is the usual thing. Our psyche, our mentality, our conception has been distorted. That the moment we talk about an alim, a Muslim scholar, then we think of him as somebody who is backward, who is retrogressive, who not, perform. That is why even if you appoint somebody, if it is a Muslim scholar, you see Muslim status, Messiah office. Why will he be a minister? We are yet to have a Muslim, an alim governor, but we had pastors as governors, and there was no problem. There was pastor as vice president, and there was no problem. But if you have an imam minister, an imam governor, there is a problem, even with the Muslims. So that was what, struck my mind, that although this is not a new paper, it's a revised version of what I presented in Indonesia when they had their conference on this ulama. So this why I thought we need to redefine, we need to reconceptualize and represent. So even if I were not able, due to time factor or to limited knowledge, unable to address this as it is, my aim is to see that we change our perception and the conception and definition of the ulama. After all, many of those whom we condemn, it is just that what they studied in Arabic language and they imparted in Arabic language. If it were in English, there would have been more most accomplished professors than most of the professors we have in the universities. So I think this is a brief what I had wanted, and based on that, we have the issue of definition. I went through the concept note. I agree with the definition provided by the organizers of this, with a little modification. Ulama and alim, the main motivation and the ultimate goal of all ulama, despite differences of opinion regarding what constitutes reform and the essentials of Islam, and the best methodology for the interpretation of major Islamic texts have been identified to be 5. 1, return to the basic sources of Islam, namely Quran and Sunnah. Virtually most of the ulama, recognized ulama, respected ulama, well-established ulama, they always want to bring people back to the main sources of Islamic law, that is Quran and Sunnah. Secondly, it is part of their main preoccupation to restore Muslim faith and morality, because Islam, the faiths and morality are inseparable. You cannot separate morality from the faiths. In fact, the Holy Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith that if you do not have shame, la imana liman la haya alahu. So the moment you do not have shame, you don't feel ashamed of doing anything you like before anybody, by this hadith definition, you have deficiency in iman. So faith to restoration of Muslims' faith and morality. Then the issue of intellectual, economic, and political revitalization of the Muslim ummah, of the Muslim society, is also very, very fundamental. You observe that in spite of the differences, different interpretation, different of opinion, different of sects and the brotherhood, that's one is not material. What matters is what are the essential things and what are the main outcome and the result for the da'wah of an individual. So at the end, you find most of the ulama, their aim is to bring people and for the restoration of the faith and morality, and also revitalization of Muslims' political, economic strength. Also to support and defend the Muslim community against internal and external enemies. One can see immediately, no matter the differences, the moment there is an external problem against Islam, you see almost all the Muslims, rally around together. We have seen this in the issue of Sharia, especially in the early 2000s. You find that regardless of where you come from, regardless of whether you are Tariqa or you are Izala or whatever you are, you see that we have a rallying. That was the time when we start to have Council of Ulama, where we have almost all people, all ulama from various sects coming under one umbrella. So this is one of it. Ensuring Islam's continued relevance to Muslim lives in all its dimensions. That is when one observes critically will find this are it. So Sheikh Usman Fodio, whose philosophy on the ideas of scholars and their nature has been considerably, taken by this work. In his Najmul Ikhwan, Sheikh Usman Fodio emphasized the importance of the works of contemporary scholars. That is to show that they are mirrors, they are embodiment, exemplary life and the stars among us. So that was why in Najmul Ikhwan, Sheikh Usman Fodio, advised the Muslim Ummah that busy yourself then, O my brethren, by reading the literary works by scholars of your time. This is because they know those things that are important to your time and situation. It has become part of their effort to give detail of those things, given briefly in books of previous scholars. That if there is any other thing, that is why, as we may see in this presentation, that when indigenous ulama started emerging in this part of the world, in this part of the Muslim world, what they first started doing was to render commentaries to some previous books and the texts that were available for centuries in Hausa. In that commentary, if you go through, they may try to give some expatiation, some elucidation, some positions which are in consonance with our local, happenings in the land. So that was why Sheikh Usman Fodio says, no matter what, even if you can read whatever you can read, but pay more attention to the books written by scholars of your period and of your time, especially like we see how he categorizes the scholars into two. Hence, the works of each generation serve as additional explanation to the literary work of those who preceded them. For this reason, each scholar exerted effort and busied himself with authorship on his own, notwithstanding that all that which could satisfy people's need in matters of religion were available in the books of scholars before him. Thus, Sheikh Usman Fodio said, we are not bringing anything new, but interpretation, expatiation, and providing commentaries so that it can accommodate some of the specific needs of the society. Thus brought us to now categorization. We have blanket statement. We have, when we say ulama, is generic name of any person who obtains knowledge, who has knowledge. But as the discussion we had in the morning shows that not all ulama are trusted. Not all ulama, like Ahdari also said, that وَيَسْأَلُ ulama, you ask all the ulama, وَيَقْتَدِي بِمُتَبِّئِينَ بِسُنَّةِ مُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. This is contained in Ahdari. This is a text that has reached Hausaland as early as the 15th century. That you can consult any scholar of your wish. You can read, you can study from under any scholar. But if it comes to the issue of imitation and the followership, then you only follow those who are on the strict followers of the Sunnah. Here, Sheikh Usman Fodio, I know it was because of his experience in Hausaland. Because the first class of people that rejected Shehu were the ulama, for so many reasons. One, of his age. He started to talk when he was, at the age of 20. His brother, Abdullah, also at the age of 17, he became an accomplished scholar that can even reply other scholars from elsewhere. So, and it was not normal in the normal educational tradition in Hausaland to have younger, people as accomplished, scholars. So that's what someone faced. And he was rejected outrightly by most scholars. They saw him as underage, as not qualified to speak, as not qualified to preach. In fact, in one of his books, he was mentioning, like we will see probably, that they said it is improper to stop evil in the land of evil. So speaking against evil in the land of evil is itself evil. So now, by this philosophy, if Shehu sees something wrong, since the land is a land of evil, he is not supposed to talk. So the issue of reform, the issue of change, so they kept mute, they did not speak. So that was why Shehu Fodio categorized ulama during his time, which I think may also be applicable during our time now, I don't know. But he said we have two categories of ulama. We have first category, that is the correct ulama, the followers of Sunnah, Ansarur Rahman, who are inwardly and outwardly after the interests of Islam and the book and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The other, he categorized them as ulama as-su. In this ulama as-su, he said they are Ansarul Shaitan. They are helpers of Shaitan. And he identified them in most of his work, especially Nurul Albab, Ihya Sunnah, and several others. He gave description that this is how you know them and this is how you identify them. But what I feel more encompassing was the position of Sidi Al-Mukhtar Al-Kunti, who Sheikh Salman Fodio respected very, very highly, and he incorporated almost all of this into his works. So Sidi Mukhtar Al-Kunti said they, the venerable ulama, included those who had knowledge but failed to put it into practice. Those who presented an appearance of compliance with the outward religious duties but had not eliminated characteristics such as vanity, hypocrisy, ambition, desire for political office and higher rank. Those who presumed that they had the exclusive right to guide the common people and yet entered into unholy alliance with the corrupt political leaders, thus encouraging the leaders' oppression of people. Those who engage in jihad, but only to obtain fame and wealth. And those scholars who use false methods. False methods. You have a methodology for da'wah. You have seen, but they use false methods, such as music, to lure people into spiritual practices. This is what Sheikh Mukhtar Al-Kunti said. The danger of those scholars, the Sidi said, could be seen from the hadith of the Prophet. I fear for my ummah after me more from ulama as-su than from the Dajjal. And when they ask you who those were, he replied, those were ulama al-alsina, ulama of tongue, who talk, but don't walk. Who say every day, but you cannot see that say in their actions. So these are fundamental problems that Sheikh Salman Fodio taught. So you see, we try to give a kind of overview of ulama scholars' position all over the world. We started with Indonesia, we have Malaysia, we have Iran, we have Egypt, so that we contextualize the position of Nigerian ulama into the wider Muslim ummah. So I think I will make this available, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Your computer. Our next speaker is Professor Tijani Muhammad Ania, and his topic is From Traditionalism to Modern Political Activism, the Kera discourse in Nigeria, 1959-1946. Before you start, sir, I would want to know, will you be speaking like a governor or like a professor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Which governor will not stop you?
Yes, okay, I will have to hide under the cover of speaking as representative of the government. But sincerely speaking, I was representing the governor at the opening ceremony. Now I'm an ordinary Tijani. Mr. Chairman, before I continue, I would like you to take 1 minute or two outside my own thing in order to explain one thing.
Yes, this is history. That's why when the keynote speaker was speaking, he was saying that other disciplines, other scholars were able to write books about Islam or conduct research on Islam, which they published. That history either ABU, OBU, or my degree, has not succeeded in doing so. Sir, I beg to disagree. Professor Ahmad Rufai, my teacher, has a book on Islam in Nigeria Conference area. Dr. Awala Anwar has his own work on struggle amongst ulama, struggle for influence and identity, the ulama in Kano, 1932 to 1987. Another work of Awal is that of the Gardawa, the ulama, and the state, the Metazine phenomena in northern Nigeria, 1962 to 1987. The work of M.D. Suleiman, so he's talking about the migrants, those migrants. Okay, you quoted that. What of the power and diplomacy? Power and by Adele. So there are so many. Historians have written. I think it's a, sometimes you can, and old age catch up with us sometimes. Old age catch up with us. Okay, so to my topic. I could see that within 5 minutes I would be given notice. So let me just hurry up. Traditionalism. What do I mean by traditionalism? I mean that the struggle, or let me start by saying, what do I mean by Sharia controversy? Because to a Muslim, when I say Sharia, I mean the entire aspect of his life. But this is not the Sharia we are talking about, principally. The Sharia we are talking about is the Sharia, the legal aspects. Because Islam, as it is, also Sharia comprise the itiqadat, the ibadat, the mu'amalat, the uqubat. So we are dealing about the uqubat, punishments, offenses and punishment, the changes that were brought. Before colonialism, this was a duty of the rulers and the ulama. After colonialism, during colonialism, the ulama were sidelined. Why? Because they were denied Western education that they could communicate. It was deliberate. They were denied the Western education, so the struggle to restore the Sharia or to make it inter was only done by the traditional rulers. But the wings of the traditional rulers was curtailed. But still they maintained for over 50 years, they refused to succumb to colonial ways and means of changing the Sharia completely. Even the aspect of the fashional law, they wanted to change it. But the rulers, traditional rulers, refused. I consider this as part of traditional thing. But what happened? When colonialism, when Britain wanted to change, and it came to the end, they realized now they are calling for a paradise. And they threatened the NPC in northern Nigeria that unless you allow to make amends in your laws, there will be no way for you to be given independence. That was the reason why the Sardauna accepted the introduction of the Penal Code in 1959. Because it was in the London Conference of 1958 that threat was given, and Sardauna had to succumb, and others from northern Nigeria. And Professor J.D. Anderson, J.N.D. Anderson was sent to come and conduct. Within 15 days, the Penal Code was introduced. Within 15 days, you could see the Penal Code, and it was made the law of northern Nigeria in 1959, in August 1959. Why? How did this succeed? It succeeded because the Europeans or the colonial realized that using traditional rulers for over 50 years, they could not change the law. Now they use politicians, and politicians, in order to gain power, they sacrifice the Sharia for penal code. The reason for the penal was that it will bring sanity among Muslim and non-Muslim in northern Nigeria. So after independence, what happened? What happened? After independence, this is continued. But immediately, Sardauna did one thing in 1960 to 263 because of the threat he was facing. Many of the non-Muslims did not know about it. Then he embarked on this campaign to Islamize. This campaign now made the non-Muslim population to start the campaign, which is up to now being agitated, is the Islamization of Nigeria, the Islamization agenda, the continuation of the jihad of Usman Dan Fodio. That was the first thing that brought about the Christian Association of the North in 1965, which the South refused to participate in. That's why it was only identified with the North. Then what happened after that? Then there was a coup. That coup now another pattern of the change came. What does that coup signify? One, it signifies the loss, the complete abandonment of the influence of traditional rulers, which means they will no longer talk about the Sharia, or they will no longer protect its interest, because already there was a penal code, and after the coup, the northern entity with northern constitution was gone. So the House of Chiefs in the House of Assembly in northern Nigeria was gone, which means the dominant culture that produced the constitution was gone. Now Nigeria was a military state, became a military state. With a military state, under the military is centralized leadership, which means everything it has to be in order to be brought. And the military is not Islamic. So which means northern Nigeria could not talk about Islam any longer as far as running of administration of justice was concerned. Why? Because immediately after that, native courts were abrogated. And that's where the emirs had influence. Native courts that applied the Sharia were abrogated. Then prison system that emirs had control was then always, it was merged with the national prison. Then native court prison, then merged. Then there's one other thing. Nigeria Native Authority Police was also merged. Many were sent away. The educated ones that could read and write in English were merged into Nigeria Police. All these things were instruments that the emirs use in the administration of the Sharia. Now they are gone. So what happened? The North and the struggle for the Sharia now had no traditional protectors, the emirs. Traditional scholars could not do anything because they could not read and write in English. And that was the medium that could be even understood by the military. So what happened? Then there has to be another pattern. The next pattern,
consistent with your request. And since you started with that,
Professor, I'm not attacking. You see, so what happened? Now, who have become the new custodians of the Sharia? The new custodians of the Sharia could not be easily discernible between 1967 and 1971 or 1970, because Nigeria was a civil war. But underneath, there were some graduates of School for Arabic Studies, especially when it became, when the nomenclature was changed and the syllabus was changed from law school to School for Arabic Studies in 1948. Many of these now were given instruction in English, solely English. And that's why, together with the Sharia. So these were the people now that started to champion the cause of the Sharia in a new form. Westernized in the Islamic, in the Western style of writing and speaking, and also equipped with the Sharia knowledge, which is a God in School for Arabic Studies. These were the categories of people like Sheikh Lemu, people like Hassan Ibrahim Golzo, people like Naidi Suleiman Wali, many of them, people like Jazuli Nuhu, so many. Under who? Under the leadership of Sheikh Abu Bakr Gumi. Why? Because the military realized that after destroying all the institutions that protect the Sharia, if they touch the institution of Grand Qadi of Northern Nigeria, there will be trouble. They knew there would be trouble. So they, in fact, Ibn Zebu called Gumi and asked him, if there is a law of the land which is under Supreme Court, why should you Muslims be special and should be given your own laws? So when he gave him the answer, then he could not say a word. But the orders of the Grand Qadi continued. I'm sorry, sir. This is very important because many of us, this thing are not aware of it. They will help us. I don't know whether among them there will be people who will write later about this. So what happened? Gumi continued as the Grand Qadi of Northern Nigeria, but without any function. Since in fact, he became Grand Qadi in 1963, after the retirement of Sheikh Awad. As Grand Qadi, he was deputy Grand, but when he resigned, then he retired, then Gumi took over. Since 1963, he continued up to 1985. Gumi was the Grand Qadi of Northern Nigeria. Up to 1985, during the time of Buhari, he was a Grand Qadi. In fact, it was in 1985 that a letter was given to him because he offended the government, that he was relieved of that he was retired. If he was Grand Qadi, what was expected of him? It was him that utilized these people, these westernized people like Wali, and he argued for their case when the issue of who was to represent the interest of the Muslim at some courts. There had to be courts, Sharia courts of appeals in the state. And when Murtala and others came and this constitutional committee under Rotimi Laws was established, then the first thing they say is you have to protect the interest of the Muslims in predominantly Muslim states. That's why they were allowed to establish Sharia courts of appeal in those states predominantly Muslim and who wanted to have it. That was the first time when Sharia courts of appeal appeared in northern Nigeria. Kano, 1975. So many of them. Then followed by northeastern states, northwestern states, and what have you. The interest, the need to bring Sharia court of appeal at federal level, that was what raised the issue. So it was, in fact, Gumi, his role was to be a consulting Grand Qadi among these states, going around being consulted by the state Sharia courts of appeal where cases have become so problematic. As I told you, by 1985, he was relieved. Another pattern, Mr. Chairman, which is also another pattern, this is also prayer, sir. Another pattern, sir, the whole dimension changed in 1976 because of 3 or 4 important developments. The first development was the assassination of the head of state, Murtala Ramat Muhammad. The second development was the issue of the killing or the execution of the coup plotters under Dimka that executed the coup about 39 of them were killed. Most of those that were killed were from the northern Nigeria, the north central Nigeria, which means the southern north, which means the Plateau, Benue region. And in the same 1976, in April, there was the recognition Nigeria took up the membership of the Vatican. Now this started to radicalize the situation. First of all, the killing of Mursala was given two interpretations, which divided the North entirely. The first interpretation was that those that killed Mursala were doing that to protect against what was done to their king, Yakubu Gowon. And for that, the Christian folk of the central Nigeria felt that they were aggrieved. And most of the 39 army officers that were killed were from their own areas. And for that reason, it's another problem they were offended. So they have to take a revenge. And when there was a counter coup, the counter coup was acclaimed to be a Muslim response. And this Muslim response now divided the Muslim side of northern Nigeria and the Christian side of northern Nigeria, which set the crisis into the open. It was this time, in order for the southern Christians to support their northern Christians, that they agreed to establish Christian Association of Nigeria. The North was changed, was replaced for Nigeria. It was in August 1976 when the Christian leaders visited Obasanjo, and it was there that they told him at Golden Bars that they were establishing a Christian Association of Nigeria. They were invited because of the pledge, issue of the Nigeria's pledge, because the Obasanjo administration was saying that every school had to recite the pledge. And the Christian was there to say it's not part of their religion. But all those that attended secondary school or teachers' college were helped to recite the pledge. In English, was also us in school parliament, we have to pledge it in English, to recite in English, and also in Arabic. I pledge to Nigeria, my country, to be faithful, loyal, and honest, to protect and honor and dignity. So to serve her with all my strength and to defend our honor and dignity, so help me God. إنني أبايع نيجيريا وطني أن أكون مخلصا وفيا أمينا وأن أخدم نيجيريا بكل قوايا so ساعدني يا إلهي. Is it time? How many minutes? How many minutes? Oh. Okay. So let me conclude, sir. Okay, this singular action now introduce another paradigm, another parameter, another pattern. This singular issue now radicalized the student folk. This is the first time when the Muslim student society of Nigeria became radicalized. In two universities, ABU and BU, and ABC ABU, later after 1970, UK. You could remember names like Ibrahim Suleiman, names like Ibrahim Iyasada, names like Bugaji, names like Adam Adam, so many in ABU, Awal Yadudu. These were the pioneers of the radicalized movement of the Muslims. They wanted to challenge the introduction, the Vatican, Nigeria joining the Vatican. They wanted to say, yes, this killing of Muslims taken, they want to say that was the agenda of abrogating this native cause, and now the agenda is coming out, marginalizing them. And this coincided with the report of the CDC that wanted to introduce, that recommended for the introduction of Federal Court of Appeal, which is a Christian who now refused to accept. And this added another Pepe to the soup. And this now may radicalize the people. And another pattern, sir, is a provocation strategy, which was deliberately introduced. And who unleashed it? The person that unleashed that was Professor Chike Obi in 1976 also, when he was invited by the NANS, National Union of University Students, to deliver a lecture at Nsukka University. And there he was clear and he made it crystal clear that the problem of Nigeria was Islam and the Fulani. Islam and the Fulani. This thing raised dust. In fact, the Drum magazine that had its roots in South Africa contacted ABU Zaria that could you respond to this? Your response will even earn remuneration. The lecturers in Zaria refused to accept. They said, if you wanted us to speak, this lecture was delivered. Chike Obi was at Lagos University, was one of the Lagos University. Why should you come to Zaria to say to respond? Which means you wanted to create a program. You wanted the Muslims to respond, so that's our big eyes. They said, if you want, go and respond. But this was the part, this was the main reason why Barack Usman produced his famous, one of his famous articles, famous paper, The Manipulation. He did it at Congo in 1976. Yes. What's it in that? Dan Allah ku bani intabiya, dan Allah. Ni da Allah nake ma, Allah nake ma. To na gode sa. So what happened? The students now got radicalized. That's why when the Sharia debate came up in 1970, a constituent assembly, the students came on the road supporting the walkout of the pro-Sharia group in the Constituent Assembly of 1978. And since then, the students were the vanguard for the reintroduction of the Sharia or restoration of the Sharia. That's why initially those elders like Hassan Usman Gwaza and what have you established non-governmental organizations in order to fight for the restoration of the Sharia. The Islamic Foundation was one of it. And all this was under that guise. That's why School for Arab Studies became the playground for this design. Now the students use the mechanism, or I can say use the instrument of IVC, Islamic Vocation Conference, to reawaken the mind of students in order to support this move. And what added momentum to this was the revolution in Iran in 1979. It also ascertained the students that with determination, Muslims should get what they want to get in northern Nigeria. In this escalated the demand and brought the issue of Sharia to become fresh, even more than what the emirs did, even though the emirs struggled for over 57 years protecting it. Unfortunately, the momentum among the Muslims and the students was broken. Because Awali has talked about it, because of the Puntua Declaration, echoed by El-Zakzaki, which divided the Muslim students' ranks. And there were the pro-Iran group, and there were others. This weakened that momentum. So what happened was the students went about to create, after graduation, many of them went about to create also non-governmental organization. In Kano, the Hudaybiyah. That was the time when the Hudaybiyah was created with that purpose. And to start to, as you said, I think somebody said it, that scholars were in this struggle, but which kind of scholars? That's why I say modern politics, elites, modern elites. Those scholars that have this knowledge of Islam traditional knowledge of Islam with modern skill of reading and writing in Western style. And that's why they introduced this thing. And it was these people, this category of people, that continued to champion the restoration of the Sharia. When they could not do this through the legal way, that's why, because I'm concluding, sir. That's why many of their products, when they came of age and it becomes a time of politics, they got into politics in order to get position to fight for this. This was what led to 1999, 2000, the Sharia Declaration. So there are so many, well, it will be seen in the paper. Thank you, sir, for this. Let me add. Please, somebody may check me out. Example of those that participated. Usman Bugaji, Awal Anwa, Shekarau. The support that Shekarau got, that's why Konkoso lost. Shekarau couldn't have defeated Konkoso, but it was the Sharia. And Hudaybiyah, let me tell you, Hudaybiyah, Inwar Kano, so many Islamic groups, like that of Ado Muhammad, those of with freedom, independent Sharia, all of them combined to fight. And this was the result that brought Shekarau to power for the sake of Sharia. Zamfara, the champion, is the same thing. Kure, Abdul Qadir Kure of Niger. Tell me any serious-minded politician at that time, you'll find that he started as an activist in Muslim student society, and now they work their way through politics and they do that. Our ulama, the challenge is to you. If you want to sustain the temper of the restoration of Sharia, you have to utilize and participate in it.
Okay. So the strategy was very successful, and it was tried in the presentation also. That was the offer of taking away at least 2 minutes from his allotted time, but he ended up with 20 more. Now, at this point, it has been time for Asr for the past 15 minutes or so. Some of us who are traveling have already prayed Zuhr and Asr together. And should we continue with the proceedings and individual can break out, pray and rejoin us? Or should we break completely and then reconvene? But that will push us towards Maghrib. That will push us towards Maghrib. Don't forget, we have not had any feedback for people to pray. I would suggest, yes, let's break for 10 minutes to pray, and that means we should come back for the last two presentations at 4:30. 4:30 we will convene. Those who want to pray Asr now, we break for them to do so, and also to use the restroom. Okay?